The rain was relentless that night, a seemingly endless torrent beating down against the windows and roof, filling the quiet house with its relentless patter. I had been alone for days, with only the rain and wind to break the silence. It wasn't unusual for me to spend time alone, but something about that night felt different. There was a sense of heaviness in the air, something I couldn't quite explain but felt deep in my bones. I had moved into this house a few months ago, needing space and quiet to focus on my writing. My little suburban street was usually peaceful, and my neighbors kept to themselves. The house itself was a quaint two-story place with dark wooden floors, old-fashioned moldings, and creaky stairs that seemed to echo with every step. It was perfect for me. But on that stormy night, the place felt different, almost foreign. The shadows were darker, and every noise seemed amplified by the emptiness around me. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, with a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. My laptop sat in front of me, untouched. I had been trying to write, but every time I started typing, I was distracted by the constant rumble of thunder and the eerie silence that filled the gaps between lightning strikes. Then, over the sound of the storm, I heard it, a faint but unmistakable ringing of the doorbell. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, unsure if I had imagined it. Who would be out in a storm like this? I got up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around me, and walked toward the door. Peeking through the small window next to the door, I saw her, a woman, standing in the pouring rain, soaked from head to toe, her shoulders hunched and head bowed against the downpour. She looked desperate. Her clothes clung to her, and her hair was plastered against her face, but her eyes were wide and searching, almost pleading. She glanced up and saw me watching her. Our eyes met for a brief, unsettling moment. She gestured frantically, motioning for me to open the door. A surge of dread washed over me. Every instinct screamed not to open that door. I didn't know this woman. She could be anyone. The rational side of me argued that maybe she was just stranded, that she needed help. But something in her gaze kept me rooted to the spot, unwilling to move. I raised my voice, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. "I'm sorry, but I can't open the door. What do you need?" She hesitated, then spoke in a voice that was barely audible over the rain, trembling and soft. "Please. I just need to get out of the rain. Just for a moment." Her voice was shaky, a mixture of desperation and something else I couldn't place, something that made my skin prickle. I repeated, apologetically but firmly, "I'm sorry, I can't let you in. Maybe I can call someone for you." For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at me through the window. Then, slowly, her expression shifted, and her eyes darkened. She gave a small, unsettling smile, and without another word, she turned and walked around the side of the house, disappearing from view. My heart raced as I backed away from the door, trying to convince myself that she was gone, that she'd found somewhere else to shelter. But a gnawing feeling in my gut told me she wasn't leaving. I walked to the kitchen, which overlooked the driveway, and that's when I saw her again, at the garage door. She was trying the handle, pressing her body against it, testing to see if it was unlocked. A chill ran down my spine. She was looking for another way in. I quickly checked the lock on the kitchen door and went around the house, double-checking that everything was secured. Every window, every door, I locked them all. I could hear her footsteps moving around outside, her shoes squelching in the mud. She was circling the house, her shadow appearing every now and then as lightning lit up the yard. I hurried upstairs, needing to get away from the doors and windows to put some distance between myself and her. In the dim light of my bedroom, I could still hear her outside, trying every entrance she could find. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that came to mind. I called the police. My hands were shaking as I dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, my voice was barely a whisper, but I forced myself to speak clearly. There's a woman outside my house. She's trying to get in. She won't leave. The dispatcher's voice was calm and reassuring. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me." The minutes felt like hours. I kept hearing her footsteps outside, moving from one spot to another. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. A floorboard creaked. I turned, heart pounding, to see the outline of a figure in the hallway. She was inside. I couldn't understand how, but there she was, standing at the top of the stairs, her silhouette barely visible in the shadows. I stifled a gasp and took a step back. My bedroom door was still open, and there was no way to close it without alerting her. She moved slowly, almost gracefully, as she glided down the hall, her wet clothes dripping onto the wooden floor. The sound of her footsteps was muffled, but each step seemed to echo, a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt like the ticking of a countdown. I shrank back, pressing myself against the wall, hoping she wouldn't see me. Just as she reached the end of the hall, she paused and turned. Our eyes met again, and this time, her smile was wider, a chilling grin that sent a shiver down my spine. The sirens echoed faintly in the distance, signaling the police's arrival. The woman's expression twisted, and she turned abruptly, disappearing into the attic staircase. I ran after her, catching only a glimpse of her climbing up and out through the small attic window, vanishing into the storm. When the officers arrived, they searched the house, but there was no sign of her. They assured me she was gone, that I was safe, but I could still feel her presence lingering in the empty rooms. As they prepared to leave, one of the officers handed me a small piece of paper he'd found in the attic. Scrawled in a shaky, almost frantic hand, was a single line, "You should have let me in. I'll be back." From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me, waiting for the next storm, the next dark night, to try again. Now, whenever I hear the rain, I can't help but feel her presence just outside, waiting, patient, knowing one day I'll have to let her in. It was a stormy night, the kind of night where every sound carries a strange weight. Thunder rolled heavily in the distance, and the wind howled against the windows, rattling the old panes. Rain pounded on the roof and cascaded down in steady sheets, creating a curtain of noise that felt almost suffocating. I was alone in my small, isolated house on the outskirts of town, surrounded only by fields and a few twisted trees. It was a place that felt like a sanctuary most of the time, but tonight it felt ominous, as if the very walls held their breath. My dog, Marlowe, usually calm and lazy, started barking suddenly from the backyard. His barks were loud and insistent, cutting through the storm and making me jump. I frowned, wondering what could have gotten him so agitated. He rarely barked unless something was genuinely bothering him. I threw on a coat, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the back door. The chill of the rain-soaked wind hit me immediately, sending a shiver down my spine. I scanned the yard, the flashlight beam bouncing off the rain. Marlowe was there, standing in the middle of the yard, fur-drenched and sticking to his frame, his body tense, every muscle locked as he growled low and continuous. "Marlowe, come here, boy," I called out, my voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. But Marlowe didn't budge. His gaze was locked on something in the dark, something I couldn't see. It was as if he was staring into the void, a look of pure, instinctive terror in his eyes. I moved closer, feeling the rain soak through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. There was nothing there, only darkness and the endless sheets of rain, or so I thought. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the way the rain was falling, or the reflection of the flashlight. But as I squinted, I realized I was looking at something solid yet transparent. The rain was striking an invisible form, a shape that seemed to distort the rain around it, tracing out a vague outline of something tall and human-like. Raindrops pooled and ran down a form that shouldn't be there, making it appear like a shimmering, ghostly figure in the middle of the yard. My heart raced, and I felt frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away as possible. But my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted in place, hypnotized by the bizarre, silent figure before me. It didn't move, just stood there, outlined by the rain, like it was studying me, considering. And then, in a split second, it darted to the side with an inhuman speed, the rain scattering in all directions as it moved. I gasped, stumbling back and nearly losing my balance. I called Marlowe, voice shaking. "Come on, boy, come on." Finally, Marlowe tore his gaze away from the figure and rushed back toward the house, and I slammed the door behind us, locking it with shaking hands. I was breathing hard, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just seen. I felt a brief moment of relief, thinking maybe we were safe inside, that maybe it was just my imagination. But Marlowe wouldn't stop growling, pacing restlessly from the door to the windows, his ears pricked, his eyes wide. His behavior set my nerves on edge. I double-checked all the locks, even though I knew logically that whatever was out there, locks wouldn't be enough. Then, a faint sound echoed from the kitchen, a subtle, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a window. My blood ran cold. I slowly made my way to the kitchen, heart pounding, every creak of the floor amplifying my anxiety. I reached the window and peered out into the night, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. There was nothing there. Just rain and shadows. And yet, that sense of being watched, of something lurking just beyond sight, remained. I turned around, intending to check on Marlowe again, but then I froze. Marlowe was no longer in the living room. I called his name softly, but there was no response. I crept through the house, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. I climbed the stairs, dread building with each step. My mind raced through terrifying possibilities. Had that thing somehow gotten inside? Was it here, waiting in one of the dark corners of my home? Halfway up the stairs, I heard a faint scratching sound above me. I looked up toward the attic, fear knotting in my stomach. Marlowe wasn't prone to going up there. He was usually terrified of the dark, cramped space, but I had no other explanation for the noise. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and climbed the rest of the way. I reached the attic door, pressing my ear against it, listening. It was silent for a moment, then another scratching sound, this time fainter, as if it was moving away. I flung open the door, flashlight in hand, illuminating the narrow, dusty space. I called out Marlowe's name, voice trembling. Nothing. Just the empty attic, its shadows stretching long and menacing in the flashlight's beam. And then I noticed a single, wet paw print on the wooden floor, leading toward the far corner. I followed it cautiously, dread twisting in my gut, until I reached the attic window. It was open, rain blowing in and pooling on the floorboards, but there was no sign of Marlowe. As I stood there, drenched, shivering, I felt the overwhelming realization that he was gone. Just gone. I backed away, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. There, scrawled on the wall in streaks of muddy rainwater, was a message. The words were crude, barely legible, but chillingly clear. I will return. The letters dripped and blurred in the rain, and as I stared, the coldest wave of fear washed over me. I stumbled back down the stairs, locking myself in my room, clutching the flashlight as if it were my only defense. Outside, the rain continued to pound against the house, relentless and mocking. I sat there, back pressed against the door, listening to the storm, waiting. It all started on a night when the storm was at its worst. Midnight was closing in, and the sky roared without end, thunder rolling over itself like waves crashing against cliffs. The rain poured down relentlessly, slapping against the windows with such force that it felt like someone was beating their fists against the glass, desperate to get inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. An uneasy sensation crept over me, as if something out there in the darkness was watching. Standing in front of the window, I traced the raindrops as they slid down the glass, one after another, like tears. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and in that brief moment, I saw it, a shadow. I told myself it was a trick of the light, probably just my nerves playing games. But every time lightning lit up the yard again, the shadow seemed closer, inching forward each time the world blinked white. Feeling unnerved, I leaned back against the wall, telling myself to breathe. After what felt like an eternity of battling my own anxiety, I decided to switch on the outdoor light. With a flick of the switch, a warm but dim glow filled the yard, revealing nothing. Relief washed over me, and I exhaled. I went back to bed, trying to ignore the relentless sound of the rain. Each drop echoed in my ears, almost like fingers tapping rhythmically on a surface. But as I lay there, another sound emerged, faint and barely audible at first. It was something buried within the rain's steady cadence, a whisper. The more I listened, the more it felt like words, something trying to form out of the noise. It was soft, almost like a hum, growing louder, inching closer, with each passing second. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but no, this was real, and it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the door. Summoning every ounce of courage, I got out of bed and moved quietly, each step feeling like it took a lifetime, until I reached the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob as the whisper grew louder, closer. It was a deep, gravelly voice, too low to understand, yet somehow chillingly familiar. Every instinct told me to turn the lock, to let whatever was out there stay out, but another part of me, the part that didn't quite believe what was happening, kept me frozen. Then it stopped. Just like that, the whispering stopped. Only the rain remained, hammering on the roof and walls. My heartbeat was loud in my chest, almost drowning out the silence that followed the whisper. Just when I thought it was over, another flash of lightning lit up the room, and a shadow loomed on the wall opposite me, large, twisted, barely human in shape. My pulse raced as I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that when I opened them, the shadow would be gone. But when I did, the room was empty, and the only sound was my breathing, shallow and fast. I took a step back, away from the door, my mind whirling with doubt. The rational side of me was begging me to stay calm, but that deep-rooted instinct, the one that had kept me alive in other situations, was warning me of danger. The whisper was gone, but a heavy presence lingered in the air, something unseen, waiting. I forced myself to glance out the window once more. And there it was, standing in the middle of the yard, a figure cloaked in darkness, staring back at me. Its arm raised slowly, and a bony hand waved, as if acknowledging that it knew I'd been watching all along. A chill spread through my body, freezing me in place. I clenched my fists, unable to look away. This figure, whoever or whatever it was, felt like something drawn from a nightmare. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The rain was the only reminder of the surreal moment I'd just witnessed, and yet, I knew it wasn't my imagination. I sat awake for hours, trying to process what had just happened. The rain continued, but its sound had changed, becoming something gentler, almost comforting. And finally, exhausted, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke the next morning, the storm had passed, and a thick fog clung to the ground outside. I cautiously opened the door and stepped onto the porch, half expecting to see footprints, signs of that figure from last night. But the yard was empty, and the grass, still drenched, was undisturbed. For days after that, I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of light and shadows. But every time it rains, that sensation returns, that someone, somewhere, is out there, watching. And now, the sound of rain tapping on my window fills me with dread, for fear that I'll hear that whisper again, inching closer, just waiting for the right moment to make itself known.